Hi, and welcome to our lesson on the neuroscience of microlearning. In the spirit of microlearning, we will keep it short and sweet. In this video, we'll discuss a few neuroscientific concepts that support microlearning first. Then we'll discuss some of the considerations learning experience designers, or LXDs, should consider when a stakeholder says, we should use microlearning. Microlearning was first popularized in 2006. Initial definitions of microlearning gave specific requirements on how long a learning experience could be before it's no longer called microlearning. However, that's no longer the case. Now it is just short. Some LXDs have expanded this definition to include learning in small chunks over a longer period of time, which allows for repetition, interleaving, and scaffolding. So what happens in the brain when we learn, and what does it have to do with microlearning? The brain physically changes as we learn new information. This is called neuroplasticity. Synapses in the brain are constantly growing, shrinking, and shifting as we experience the world around us. Synapses found in brain regions including the hippocampus, frontal cortex, and striatum are important for learning and retaining new information, but each region is important for different types of memory. Declarative memory is learning new facts and information, as well as more personal, goal-oriented learning. This type of memory depends on the hippocampus. Procedural memory is learning new skills or conditioning. This type of memory depends on the striatum. Short and long-term memory could be either category. As learning experience designers, our goal is to convert a learning experience from short to long-term memory. Regardless of the type of memory, motivation is necessary for learning. We think of dopamine as a feel-good neurotransmitter. While dopamine is more complex than this, dopamine does encode motivational salience. We can hypothesize that because microlearning is done in short bursts, completion of a learning segment could lead to activation of the dopamine reward pathway, which would enhance the motivational salience of future microlearning modules. There's also evidence that dopamine is necessary for memory consolidation because of dopamine's influence on neuroplasticity in the hippocampus. Cognitive load is dependent on the complexity of information a person is trying to learn and external factors that impact one's ability to engage with the content. Cognitive load can be intrinsic, which is fixed. Intrinsic cognitive load refers to the specific information and how complex it is. Learning simple addition versus differential equations, for example. However, many external factors can impact cognitive load. Collectively, these are called extraneous cognitive load. Some factors that impact extraneous cognitive load support the neuroscience behind microlearning. First, the concept of isolated elements suggests that presenting information in smaller, isolated chunks decreases cognitive load. This is the basis of microlearning. Create small, digestible learning experiences. However, to create short learning experiences, the author and subject matter expert must be very clear on what is necessary and relevant. In fact, the concepts of split attention and redundancy state that processing irrelevant or redundant information increases cognitive load, which ultimately makes learning more difficult. Because many microlearning experiences are accessed via educational technology, learners can perceive the module as transient. The concept of transient information states that knowledge that is perceived as temporary, like information on the internet, can increase cognitive load. Information that is more interactive and therefore disappears from the screen quickly is transient. This is important to keep in mind when presenting information to learners. Interactive graphics can increase novelty and engagement, but it might be more challenging for students to connect one interactive with another due to the transient nature of the content. In 1885, Ebbinghaus published a novel concept, now called the forgetting curve. He and others found that over time, it takes much longer to recall and relearn information. Even at 20 minutes after learning, there is only about a 60% retention rate. Others have investigated ways to improve the learning curve and enhance retention. One example of an effective intervention is spaced learning. Learning in intervals leads to retention, possibly by enhancing synaptic plasticity and maintaining important synapses during the learning process. Because microlearning modules are short bursts of learning, they can be repeated, or information can be interleaved across small modules. This allows for repetition and increased retention. If neuroscientific concepts are taken into consideration, microlearning can be effective and beneficial. Arguably, the most important goal for learning experience designers is knowledge acquisition and retention. Researchers conducted a meta-analysis and found microlearning interventions improved knowledge acquisition compared to the control group, demonstrating that, when done effectively, microlearning can meet at least the minimum expectation of learning experience designers. Further, because many microlearning modules can be available indefinitely, learners can re-access them, minimizing the forgetting curve by consolidating knowledge into long-term memory. A touted benefit of microlearning is the ability for employees to complete short bursts of learning during their few free minutes on the clock. But microlearning can be used to help patients or lay people outside of work. For example, a group of researchers created microlearning modules that were sent by text to patients recently diagnosed with diabetes. The modules were meant to educate them about the disease and how to care for themselves. Patients reported enhanced quality of life after completing the microlearning modules. While there are many benefits to microlearning, not all learning experiences are suited for it. For example, it can be difficult to teach completely novel concepts in small chunks because it requires more background knowledge. When we are onboarding new hires or teaching semester-long courses, microlearning may not be the best framework for these learning experiences. While not necessary, most microlearning depends on technology, which can be an accessibility and equity issue. Designing microlearning modules that are accessible on a computer and a phone requires an added level of consideration, which means more time spent on the product and greater cost. Accessibility costs should be incorporated into the initial budget, but this might mean being creative about how one designs a microlearning module. Finally, considering the transient information effect on cognitive load, if microlearning is short and disappears quickly, it could increase cognitive load and long-term reliance on the microlearning modules. Learning experience designers need to be intentional about when and how microlearning modules are accessed so that they are financially feasible, accessible, and not perceived as transient. Learning experience designers may recoil when they hear the term microlearning, and rightfully so. The concept has saturated the market, which often leads to blurring the meaning and sensationalizing the concept. When this happens, learning experience designers may sacrifice creating effective learning experiences in pursuit of creating buzzworthy learning experiences. However, microlearning has earned its right to saturate the market. Its existence is backed by a century of psychological and neuroscientific data on how humans learn. If we consider the neuroscience behind microlearning, then blurring the meaning allows us to think more broadly about what microlearning ultimately is. For example, short training modules, or even modules encapsulated in a larger course, can be considered microlearning. By investigating how humans learn, we know that decreasing cognitive load through short bursts of repetitive but novel practice ultimately increases retention. If microlearning takes advantage of these concepts, perhaps the buzzword is effective.